I think a lot of times, especially in the church arena, we make things complicated. It's very simple. If lives are being changed, if families are being restored, if there's life being given, then it doesn't matter the role that I'm playing.
Right.
It matters that those things are happening. Hey guys, welcome to the CA podcast. I'm Chad and I'm with Vinny.
Hey, what's up?
And if you enjoy everything that we're doing here, all of our different shows, we'd love it if you subscribed and liked and did all that stuff because, it helps when people, support us.
Yes.
And that's a way that you can support us because otherwise Vinny's going to be sad looking at his, subscriber count that's
going up.
Yeah. So, I mean, just help him out. It really, gets to him when you guys don't subscribe and you watch because we can see the people that don't subscribe that watch us. We see you. We see you. I see you. He sees you.
That person right there.
Brian probably sees them too. Brian for sure sees them.
Definitely does.
So, so today's topic, as we went off the rails, so there's this scenario, right, where, you've been in a seat of, say, control or say like an executive seat where you have, or say even a job that you've done before, right?
Right.
And you've done it before, and then you come into a new place, right? And then now you're sitting under the seat that you used to sit in, right?
Yep.
And we've both been in these scenarios before in our lives, in multiple areas, right? Not even you talk about, we can probably say this about, every year of our life, right? Always some type of scenario that we used to make decisions in or something like that. Now we're sitting on that seat. So how do you make it so that you respect the person above you? Mm-hmm. Right. And you don't, I say, usurp them or, mitigate things they're doing or belittle them. Because I think when you sat in someone's seat before, there's a temptation to say, why are they doing this? Or right. I wouldn't have done it that way. And then disassociate when you're supposed to be serving under them and supporting them. So how do you maintain that?
So I think for a lot of people, this is a hard one.
Yes.
Right. I know we're living in these kind of situations even
for
now.
Sure.
For me, it's a matter of loyalty and respect. And it takes time to get that.
Right.
So if there's no respect or loyalty, then people can fall into what you talked about.
Yeah.
But if there's respect and loyalty there, I think it's harder to fall into that trap.
Right.
But I think that's a trap when you find yourself that, like, for instance, I've been a pastor.
Yeah.
Right. Led a church.
Yeah.
Right. And so now I'm sitting not second chair, not third chair, like fifth chair in right now.
Right.
And so people making decisions and things, and I have to sit back and watch as I'm like, okay, would I have done that? Maybe not that way. Right. But looking at it from, they've been in this area longer. So what I try to do is look at it from their perspective.
Yeah.
That they've been here longer.
Yeah.
They know the people.
Yeah.
They know the area.
Right.
They know the climate and the culture a lot better than I do.
Yeah.
So I have to trust their judgment at that point.
Sure.
And so for me, I've learned to do that because I've sat in many chairs.
Of course.
And so right now is an interesting season where I'm not in like a higher role.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's where God has me, right?
Yeah.
And so an understanding like God puts you in places and in positions for certain reasons, right?
Yeah.
And so what I've learned is to respect your leader, be loyal to them, and try to see it from their perspective, not yours, because what worked where you were may not work where they are.
That's key. Yeah. And I think, one thing that I've done, and all that's great because I mean, the perspective is such a big deal. Like, because when you come into it, especially a new area, a new place, like you may have made decisions where you were because, hey, you were in a city and now you're in a rural area. Now you're in, a completely different economic system, right? So like, there's so many decisions that you would make in certain areas that you can't make in other areas. And so that's a great point. But then one thing that I kind of was always taught kind of growing up was, who are the people that you want to serve under you, right? Like who are the people that you want to lead? Well, if you can't be that person,
Super.
then why do you expect the people beneath you to act like that.
Yeah.
So if I can't serve somebody and be, like you said, loyal, and support them, then what I'm going to reap is when I do get that position or I get another position, then I'm going to have people beneath me
right.
that are constantly questioning me, constantly usurping me, constantly mitigating me. And, we've both been there. Like, the worst thing that could possibly happen is someone basically underneath you while you're serving you're doing things, and they just basically just cut you at the knees on a decision that you thought, because they didn't voice their decision, you thought you were in unity over, and then you turn around and they basically just have a knife in your back, and you're like, wait, I thought we agreed on this, and they're like, well, you don't know XYZ, and it's like, wait a second, we could have talked about this, and so that's another thing, is communication.
Super.
So like, if you're not talking to the person you're above and be like, hey, so what was your thought process with this? Just I want to learn. Then at what point are you the problem? Because then it's like, if you don't want to even understand where the decision came from, then what kind of leader are you?
So good.
And so I think a lot of times what I like is I like sitting in the chair behind the chair that I used to sit in, because it makes me question why I did things. But then it makes me resolute, because then when I can see someone else's process, then it can refine my process. And then in turn, I become a better leader for when my time comes again. Or maybe it doesn't, and all I am is supposed to be a support role. And I think that's the other thing, is like, at what point do you just go, you know what, as long as we're pushing the vision forward, right? And especially in the church, as long as people are getting saved, as long as people are getting transformed, right? I think a lot of times we, especially in the church arena, we make things, I guess, complicated. It's very simple. If lives are being changed, if families are being restored, if there's life being given, then it doesn't matter the role that I'm playing. It matters that those things are happening. And so then I never want to be the stunt to that. And so I think another thing, I was at a church and they were talking about how they wanted unity, and that, they were basically willing to protect unity at all costs. And I think that's another thing. It's like, what happens when you're the source of the disunity? It's like, then you have to correct that. You're at the wrong, Yeah.
And I think, so like, we're culture architects, right? And so like, that's the name of this whole thing. And for me, it's like, if you don't know the culture you're in, right, it's hard to serve in that environment. That's
good.
Right. And so for me, for the past few years in the church we're in now, it was learning the culture, learning their DNA, learning how they operate and do things. And now, as a connections pastor, I'm trying to bring that culture to the new people coming in. So I had to like literally learn all of this stuff, and then say, okay, now that I understand the culture, right, and how they operate, now I have to portray that to every guest that comes in the door, 100%. Right? And then every person that's serving now, right, comes through the courses that I'm doing. And it's like, okay, I had to understand what the culture is all about here, and know like the roles and who does what, and what the communication is and how it's communicated, and lack of communication and where the lack actually happens. And so it was it's a learning process. And if you're not quick to learn, you'll be quick to fail. And so, and you'll find yourself, resenting, and you'll find yourself in position of, well, I would have done that, or I would have done this. And it's like, man, no, like, take a step back and look at the culture around that's there. And so for us as being, we're building cultures, right? That's what we call our culture. That's what we want to do, is build a culture. And it's like, man, I had to take that and bring it into the church, right? Whether it's a business or a church or whatever, it's doing those kinds of things, And for me, I find it, whereas once you learn that culture and you can understand it, then you can bring about change. You'll never change a culture if you don't know the culture.
It's good. I mean, and what you said right there. So say that again.
You'll never change the culture if you don't know the culture.
That's huge. I mean, and that right there, that's like the whole basis of this conversation, is like, because I think a lot of times we'll feel like, because we know the position or we know how things should operate, that it should operate that way. But then we fail to realize we learned it in a different culture sometimes.
Totally different.
And so, and then we're trying to bring something in play. And here's the great thing. Sometimes you can take, because, you look at plants, right? There's certain plants that can only grow in certain types of temperatures and certain types of environments and so, you know, and so I'm learning that with my wife is very big into plants right now. So I'm learning, you know, there's certain plants that don't work here because of the weather, right?
Yep.
But you sometimes can take something from one area and bring it to the other, but sometimes there's extra work that has to go into it to keeping it alive, right? You got to cover it, you got to do this, you got to bring it inside, you got to bring it outside, you got to water it a different way, like all these different things. And it's like, so then sometimes the culture that you're trying to bring will take more time and more effort.
Right.
And so it's like, hey, maybe there's a time and place for that.
Right.
But right now, can you serve in the culture that's currently there?
Right. It's like knowing that, hey, I know this system can work.
Yes.
If I put this system in place.
Yes.
But if they're not ready for that system,
right,
then that system can't work there. It's like you can get all the right equipment, all the right things, and know, I know how to make this work. Right. And like, you know, whether it's this camera with this piece of that, and you can put all that together, right? But if you don't have the people in place that can run it, it's not going to run.
Exactly.
Right. And so it's like, it's that mentality of saying, man, okay, I know this can work. I know I can do this. I know I can do that, but maybe not yet. Right. And maybe not with this person or that person. It's knowing what you're surrounded by and who you're surrounded by. And like understanding like, okay, the temperature here is this, you know what I mean? And whereas the temperature where you once were, right, might have been super hot in this area. And you're like, we're doing this. And like constantly growing. Right. Whereas here it's like, hey, we're hot for this month. And then we're super cold for this month. Right. So there's growth. Then there's decline. Then there's growth, decline, growth. You're growing, but it's at a lot slower pace than what you're used to because that's the climate that you're in.
Yeah, and I think to that point, we were both at a church that did something called June Family Month.
Yes.
And it took what was a low attendance, right? A low attendant month, right? So pretty much lowest attendance in the year,
right?
In terms of conglomerate. And basically, every Sunday, they did a big family event.
Right.
Bowling, movie, scavenger hunt, something, right?
Yep.
And I think what it did, though, is it built community, but it also was so conducive to that culture because the tagline is welcome to the family right, of that church. And so they took something that was a part of their core values and they used it to encourage more attendance and encourage families to come together, and it encouraged people that didn't have a family to come, and then they would experience family,
right?
Which is what the Bible is all made up of, you know. And so it's so cool to see like that type of stuff where it was like that was such a smart move. But you know, those things took time and fine tuning and what types of events do people like versus they don't. It took going out on a limb and saying, hey, let's do this type of thing. Right. And even during COVID, we were there and trying to reimagine that month.
Do the indoor Olympics.
Indoor Olympics.
World were we thinking?
I know there's so much that it was like, what in the world? But like, we learned, but through trial and error.
Oh, yeah.
So willing to fail at an event, but then come back and go, hey, this is how we can do it better.
Right.
And so I think that's the type of thing that, you know, we're kind of talking about is like, in kind of getting off on a, you know, tangent, but it's one of those things of like, those are the type of things that work in that environment.
Yeah.
But then trying to bring it to this environment, because, you know, you led a lot of those events. You and your wife were.
We led all of the events. Yes.
Yeah. And so the thing is, but that doesn't, will that work one day in this culture? Maybe.
Right. Have we tried it? Yes.
Yeah.
Does it work? Not as well.
No. And so that's
different.
Right. So that's what I'm trying to say is like, and kind of give that example. It's a real world example. Something that actually happened is it took an incredible concept, something that we saw that worked and was like, dang, why doesn't every church do this? Right. And then you bring it somewhere else, you're like, oh, that's why every church doesn't
this is why right here.
But it makes sense, right? Like, oh, we had these numbers and we had XYZ. And like we even talked about on a former episode, even like the online church thing. Right. You know, like how taking one thing from a mega church, it doesn't necessarily apply culture to your
definitely not.
Right. And so I think we learned that. And so it's
right, but also knowing that like some of the things that you try to implement may not be supported by the whole cast. The whole staff, everybody might not be in support of whatever it is that you're doing. And so that might be another reason why certain things may not work in an environment. And so it's like, you know, trying to bring something to another place is difficult.
Yeah.
Can it work? Yes.
Of course.
I think when people get around it
Yeah.
and it becomes part of the culture,
Yeah.
then it's huge. And that's what it is from, looking at it from like a GT perspective where we were. It was like that was the culture. June, it's family month, and it was a huge deal.
Everybody's on board.
Oh, and I mean, that's what they're talking about in every sermon. Like it's all about that. And the whole month is dedicated to it. Tag team. I mean, it's the whole gamut, right? So the culture was around it.
And all the campuses were doing
right,
it.
Everybody, right? And so when you come to and try it somewhere else, and it's like, and it's a slow rollout,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, can this work? Absolutely, it can. But this is how it can work.
Yeah.
And so, and we've slow rolled it out and seen some pretty good success with a lot of the events that we've done. So it's been fun. But and it's like, but in this topic where we're saying, hey, we're kind of taking a backseat role, right? It's knowing like, hey, they're going to let you do certain things.
Yeah.
And if it's successful, kudos, right?
Yeah.
If it's not successful, what's great is we have leadership that still encourages us to try things.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a sign of good leadership too.
Yes.
Is like, hey, we're not used to that stuff here.
No.
But give it a try.
Yeah.
Right? And so a sign of a great leadership is when they're willing to watch others do something, and whether it's successful or not, at least they tried.
Right. And because I relate even now for me, like when I came here, the position I held in a church was fairly high in both churches. So in terms of my, what I was able to do with media, right?
Right.
And so when I came here, I love the fact that I was just pretty much a volunteer. Like I was so happy to walk in the door and be like, like I'd see our guy that runs everything. He would be running around like ping ponging, and I'd be like, I'm so glad that's not me right now. and then as about 6 months went by, then I started getting more involved and more involved, and then we upgraded. The end of last year, we upgraded all of our camera equipment, which just enhanced everything, made our online experience so much better. It made like our social media so much better. Like it's just there's so much that came into it. But one of those things of me learning the culture, because there's a way to upgrade that stuff that enhances the culture, believe it or not. It's not just a one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
So like learning like, okay, these are the types of cameras we need, right? These are the types of lens systems we need. And knowing that from observing the culture, observing the volunteers, and then going, hey, the ceiling is not the volunteer. The reason we're hitting a ceiling is not the volunteers. It's the equipment that the volunteers are using. So like my whole thing was, well, when I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, like the volunteers aren't the problem. It's the equipment, right?
Right.
And sure enough, we get this equipment, and now all the volunteers, they're sealing like, oh my goodness, like everybody creatively off the charts, right?
And you've added more volunteers. I mean, it's been
it's been incredible.
Run.
It's been incredible. And so I think but it was one of those things of me sitting back going, I don't need to be the guy. I don't need to be the one that makes the decisions, but if they ever come to me and ask me, I'm ready for it because I'm observing things. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
It was like, hey, we want to upgrade our camera system. Like, okay, well, let me build something together. And I already had the idea because I remember I would come in and I would tell you, these are the things that I would do. And then I would come back and I go, you know what? Actually, now that I think about it, I think I would do this instead of this. And I went through almost a year of in my head dreaming out what things could look like.
Right.
But what's great is I was able to dream because I wasn't having to hold a position, right? So I wasn't having to hold, because this is the other thing. Sometimes I don't want to sit in that seat because the things that have to be held in that seat are things I don't want right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's a responsibility that I don't want. So I have to sometimes be thankful that I'm not sitting in those chairs sometimes, because sometimes where our lives are, it's a good thing that we're not sitting in we're having to make those calls.
Right. And it's like, so we went through tough seasons, right? Of like, man, we were full on for 4 years of planning and building a church, and then watching that just fizzle out after some sickness hit America. And it's like, man, and then coming here during all of that, like towards the end of all of that was, and trying to fit in and them not knowing anything about me, but taking on my wife. And it's like, and I was sitting here going, oh, I need this time anyway.
Yeah.
Like, I just need this time to kind of figure me out right now.
Right.
And, you know, for me, it was like hearing from God was important during that season, that, you know, because God was showing me stuff like, man, you don't have to worry about building the church. Start building my kingdom.
Oh, that's good.
And so like that, like literally God spoke to me that word through somebody. And so like hearing that, and that, like, those are the things that I held on to, was like, man, I don't have to be the number one guy, number two guy. I can just be a guy.
Yeah.
Right? I can be a guy and help out where I'm needed. Right. And so for me, it was, I've been that guy. I don't mind being that guy. I could be that guy again, if that's what God wants me to do. Right now, he has me in this role where I'm building the kingdom, doing this, reaching more people than we ever thought imaginable, doing podcasts, doing ministry outside of this. And it's like, I don't think I would have reached as many people in the sphere that we have right now, and not just helping one church, helping multiple churches that you're doing, right? And it's like, bro, we're doing so many different things that we never thought we'd be doing had we stayed in the seat, right? And like you hold this position, and it's like, and God's like, you don't need a position. Right? You need a posture. And like, all we want to do is posture ourselves with him and serve him. And he's putting us in places like we never thought possible.
And I love it, because we were talking about it earlier, we were recording something, and I said to you, like, how crazy is it, a year ago, me and you were talking about the things we wish we could do in certain areas. And now not only were we both, all three of us, really doing them all, but then it's also, we're doing it, I kind of even think in abundance of where we thought we would be in the process. Because we were talking about it like more of like a dream, right? Like, man, like if we could get all this stuff running, and then it's like, oh, like now a year later, it's like, oh, we're doing everything that we were saying. And I think it's so cool, because I think we're able to do that because we're not holding these positions and holding this responsibility. And that's the thing. I'm thankful for the people that hold those seats and those responsibilities in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Because I know a lot of times what that is.
Dude, the responsibility, everything that's involved with it. And it's like, man, that's why I can sit and not in the seat and respect that seat.
Exactly.
Is because I've been there. And I don't want, like, if ever I get to that seat again, I don't want people to be questioning what I'm doing. I just want people to be respecting what I'm doing.
That's it.
And if you can hold on to that mentality of, man, I'm going to respect that seat because I've been there. It's important.
So, I mean, I think we end there, because I think that's the bow right there. You know, I think that's, because in all of this, like, I think our heart behind this is like, we're at a place in our lives where, like, we've gotten to it where, like, yes, was it hard in the past, like sitting under somebody that held our positions? Yes. But I think we've now learned, both of us, in different areas, like completely different areas.
Right.
We both learned, like, hey, you know what? There's a reason that I'm where I'm at now. And a lot of times too, it's, and the other thing we didn't touch on too much, but it's the truth is, being able to assist those people, give the people in that chair the assistance we never got in that chair.
Super.
So that's something I realized that I really want to do now, is the people that were serving in the chair that are serving in the chair that I was serving in, I want to give them all the support that I thought I needed that I never could get. And I think that's the thing where it's like, what can you do now if you're in that position, that you can actually assist your leader and give them the help you never got. You know?
That's good.
And so I think, you know, we're just in there, and, you know, I'm sure this is a topic that'll come up again.
I'm sure.
I mean, it's a good one. So, all right. We'll see you next week.